Welcome to The Debate. If you were writing a story about the salvation of the entire world, would you entrust it to a family of liars, manipulators, and betrayers?
You probably wouldn't.
Right, but that is exactly what Genesis does. Genesis begins in a garden and it ends with a physical coffin in Egypt. That specific journey, from the cosmic scale of Eden to an embalmed body in a foreign land, that is the key to understanding this text.
Yeah, it really is.
It is not some random collection of disconnected Sunday school stories about, arcs and apples. It is one unified, meticulously structured narrative arc, held together by a really profound theological argument.
But we really have to look closely at the trajectory of that arc. Because if you're listening to this and trying to map out the plot, you hit a glaring tension right away. I mean, why does the story suddenly shrink from the entire world down to just one highly dysfunctional family?
It's a drastic shift.
It really is. And why does every single chosen generation seem to, fail spectacularly? I want to ask, is Egypt actually a complete ending, or is it just a tragic setup?
Well, those are the exact tensions we need to explore today. The central question before us is this: why does Genesis move from that pristine, cosmic beginning in Eden to the dark reality of a coffin in Egypt? And what underlying mechanism actually holds this entire book together through all that chaos?
And the counter perspective I want to press on throughout this discussion is the nature of that progression. Because from my view, the story's movement from the whole world down to one family is defined primarily by repeated human fracture. Ending in Egypt, it just doesn't feel like a triumphant resolution. It doesn't feel like a clean, wrapped-up ending, It feels like an exile. It leaves the grand promise of the land of Canaan deeply in doubt. We just have to be careful not to flatten Genesis into a simple moral lesson where the good guys win.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. I view the narrative structure of Genesis as a brilliant, intentional funnel. You can think of it like the first season of a massive epic television series.
Okay, I track with that.
Right? It gives you the cosmic origin, it introduces the fatal wound of humanity, and then it reveals a divine promise of restoration. But it tracks that promise through just one chosen, deeply flawed family.
Deeply flawed is putting it mildly.
Fair enough. But the journey to Egypt is not a failure of the promise. I'd argue it is the strongest responsible theological interpretation of divine providence. You have God's faithfulness moving persistently through human failure in order to incubate a nation, so the promise survives the people who carry it.
See, I come at it from a different way. The text explicitly states a trajectory of human trauma. I mean, from Cain and Abel's violence to the Tower of Babel, down to the patriarchs. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, they constantly deceive, betray, and literally tear their own families apart.
They do.
So ending in Egypt isn't a triumphant season finale. It's messy. It is a tragic reality where flawed people are stranded outside the promised land, holding on to a promise that just hasn't materialized yet.
To understand how that tension resolves, though, we have to look at the opening of the funnel, the first 11 chapters. Genesis sets up a very specific rhythm of creation and order.
Right.
Dad speaks order into a formless void. Light is separated from darkness, land from water, and humanity is placed in Eden as divine image bearers to rule the earth. There's this profound universal blessing, but, that cosmic order fractures almost immediately.
Yeah, and we all know the beats of that fracture. The eating of the fruit, the hiding, the banishment. But what fascinates me is how rapidly the text accelerates that breakdown.
It's incredibly fast.
Right, it doesn't just stay a story about a man and a woman disobeying a rule. By the very next generation, you have sibling rivalry escalating to murder. Cain kills Abel in a field, and God's response is haunting. He says, "The blood of your brother cries out to me from the ground."
Yeah.
The earth, which was just pronounced very good, is suddenly saturated with human violence.
And that violence becomes systemic. It infects the entire globe, which structurally necessitates the flood. Because the flood isn't just a punishment, Logically, within the text, it is a cosmic decreation.
The waters of chaos come back.
Exactly. The waters of chaos that God separated in Genesis 1 are allowed to collapse back in on the earth. So Noah and his ark represent a desperate attempt at a new beginning. But even after the floodwaters recede, humanity arrogantly gathers on a plain in Shinar.
The Tower of Babel.
Right. They build the Tower of Babel to make a name for themselves to reach the heavens on their own terms. And God scatters them and confuses their language.
And this is exactly where the narrative structure completely shifts gears. This is the pivot that I think we really need to wrestle with. Because if you're a reader, you've just spent 11 chapters dealing with the whole globe.
Right. The macro scale.
Yeah, you've seen catastrophic global floods, the origin of nations, the entire human race scattering. And then, suddenly, Chapter 12 abandons the global scale entirely. The camera zooms all the way in on one random obscure shepherd in Mesopotamia named Abram.
Yeah.
Why? I mean, why shrink the focus so drastically? It's as if you're reading a comprehensive history of the universe, and Chapter 2 is exclusively about a guy living in a tent in Haran.
Well, because that narrowing is the structural hinge of the entire book. You can't solve a cosmic rebellion with another global flood. The text already proved that doesn't change the human heart.
Okay, fair point.
So the narrative offers a different mechanism. God calls Abram out of Haran with a highly specific promise. He says, "Go to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you." But here is the critical phrase that connects him back to the first 11 chapters. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you.
So the scope actually is still global.
Yes, exactly. The cosmic problem gets a microscopic, family-sized solution. God is going to rescue the world by tethering himself to one specific bloodline.
I understand that is the stated theological goal. But I'm sorry, I just don't buy the neatness of that master plan narrative when you look at the actual evidence in the text. Let's look closely at who is carrying this world-altering promise.
Go ahead.
Abraham receives this massive promise of land and descendants, and what is his very first major act when a famine hits? He goes down to Egypt and actively lies about his wife, Sarah.
He tells Pharaoh she is his sister.
Right, to save his own skin. He literally hands the bearer of the promised seed over to a foreign king. I mean, if God hadn't intervened with plagues on Pharaoh's household, Abram's cowardice would have derailed the salvation of the world right there in Chapter 12.
It is a staggering moment of human failure. And you're right to point it out, especially since he repeats that exact same deception later with Abimelech.
Exactly.
But I argue that this is precisely the author's point. The narrative is aggressively dismantling the idea that the chosen family is chosen because they are morally superior. The promise relies entirely on God's unilateral faithfulness.
But how does the text justify that? If the humans keep dropping the baton, how does the race continue?
Well, by redefining the nature of the contract. Look at the covenant ceremony in Genesis 15. Abraham asks how he can know he will possess the land. God tells him to cut animals in half and arrange the halves opposite each other.
Which was a standard ancient Near East treaty, right?
Yes, exactly, a suzerain vassal treaty. Both parties would walk through the bloody pieces, essentially swearing, "May I be torn apart like these animals if I break my end of the deal."
But Abraham doesn't walk through them.
No, he doesn't. A thick darkness falls, Abraham falls into a deep sleep, and only a smoking firepot and a blazing torch, which represent the divine presence, pass between the pieces.
Meaning God is making the oath unilaterally.
Exactly. Let me put it in modern terms. It's like two people sitting down to co-sign a massive mortgage that they both have to pay off. But at the last second, the bank pushes you out of the chair, signs both lines, and says, "Actually, I am taking on 100% of the liability if you default. You are completely covered."
Wow.
Abraham is structurally removed from the burden of keeping the promise alive through his own perfection. The burden rests entirely on the divine.
That's a beautiful theological image. But we cannot ignore the collateral damage that happens when Abraham forgets that he doesn't have to force the promise.
Well, yeah.
He constantly tries to manufacture the blessing through human means. Because Sarah is barren, she gives Abraham her Egyptian servant, Hagar. Abraham sleeps with her, she conceives Ishmael, and it immediately fractures the household.
It gets incredibly toxic.
Beyond toxic, Sarah despises Hagar, abuses her, and Hagar is forced to flee into the harsh desert. The chosen family isn't just imperfect, it becomes a site of deep, systemic pain and abuse. We have to reckon with the fact that divine election here creates victims.
I don't disagree that the human meddling causes immense trauma, but the narrative is showing us that the promise is a heavy, almost dangerous reality. It refines the people who carry it. And that brings us to the next generation, where this tension only amplifies.
Amplifies an understatement. I mean, if we thought Abraham had moral failings, his grandson Jacob turns deception into an art form.
He really does.
The dissenter in me looks at Isaac and Jacob and just sees a generational curse being passed down. Isaac favors Esau, Rebekah favors Jacob. The family is entirely fractured by favoritism.
Yeah, it's a terrible dynamic.
And when Isaac is old and blind, Jacob literally covers his arms in goat skins to mimic his hairy brother, lies to his father's face, and steals the patriarchal blessing. And he had previously manipulated a starving Esau out of his birthright for a bowl of stew.
Right, the lentils.
Yeah. This isn't a holy family, it's a den of vipers. Why does the narrative choose a supreme deceiver to carry the blessing of Eden?
Well, because the structure suggests something far more profound than a simple morality tale. We naturally want flawless protagonists, but the text wants to show that the blessing survives despite the patriarchs.
Despite them. Yeah.
And notice how the narrative deals with Jacob's deception. He isn't rewarded with an easy life. He pays a severe price. He has to flee his home in terror, and he meets his uncle Laban in Paddan Aram. And Laban is a man who is an even greater manipulator than Jacob is.
Right. Laban tricks Jacob into marrying the wrong sister, Leah, under the cover of darkness, which forces him to work 14 years for Rachel, the woman he actually loves.
The trickster gets tricked.
Yeah, exactly.
But through all of that agonizing labor, the physical and spiritual weight of carrying this promise finally culminates at the Jabbok River in Genesis 32.
Oh, I love this scene.
It's amazing, isn't it? Jacob is traveling back to Canaan. He is about to face Esau, who is marching toward him with 400 men. Jacob is terrified. He sends his family and his wealth across the river, and he is left completely alone in the dark. And a man wrestles with him until daybreak.
It's just a bizarre, haunting scene. They wrestle all night, and the man touches the socket of Jacob's hip, wrenching it out of joint.
Yet, even with a dislocated hip, Jacob refuses to let go. He says, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." And then the man asks for his name. Now, think about the last time Jacob was asked his name.
Oh, by his father.
Right. He was standing in front of his blind father and he lied, saying, "I am Esau." But here, in the dirt, he tells the truth. Jacob, he says, the heel grabber, the deceiver.
Wow.
And the divine wrestler says, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome." He literally limps away from Peniel. That is the core mechanism of Genesis. The promise alters you. It breaks down your self-reliance and remakes you.
It alters him, sure. But I have to push back. Does it actually heal the family dynamic? Because when we look at the climax of this family toxicity, the 12 sons of Jacob, it is an absolute nightmare.
It's pretty bad.
Jacob learned nothing about favoritism from his parents. He openly favors Joseph, giving him a richly ornamented robe. And Joseph, well, he doesn't help. He flaunts his dreams where the sun, moon, and stars, representing his family, bow down to him.
Yeah, he's incredibly arrogant as a teenager.
Exactly. So the brothers don't just dislike Joseph, they actively plot his murder.
Which brings us back to the primary mechanism of human fracture in Genesis, sibling rivalry. Cain and Abel, Ishmael and Isaac, Esau and Jacob, and now Joseph and his brothers.
Exactly. And the brothers at Dothan see Joseph coming and say, "Here comes that dreamer. Let's kill him and throw him into a cistern." Reuben tries to stall them, but Judah, the brother from whom the royal line of kings will eventually come, looks at the situation and says, "What will we gain if we kill our brother? Let's sell him to the Ishmaelites."
It's so cold-blooded.
For 20 pieces of silver. They sell their own flesh and blood into foreign slavery. Then they dip his beautiful robe in goat's blood, hand it to their father, and let Jacob believe his favorite son was ripped apart by wild animals.
And Jacob refuses to be comforted.
Right, he declares he will go down to the grave mourning. It is the absolute collapse of the chosen family. They have literally destroyed themselves.
The fracture is incredibly deep. It seems unfixable. But that brings us to the narrative climax of the book, where we see exactly how divine providence operates.
Down in Egypt.
Yes, Joseph is taken to Egypt. He is sold to Potiphar. He is falsely accused and thrown into a dungeon. He endures years of silence and forgotten promises. Yet, through his God-given ability to interpret Pharaoh's dreams about the impending 7-year famine, he is elevated to second in command of all Egypt.
From prisoner to prime minister.
Exactly. But the text isn't just about Joseph's personal success. It's about the famine forcing his treacherous brothers to come to Egypt to buy food.
Aided him for.
Yes, but Joseph doesn't just reveal himself immediately. He tests them. He needs to see if they are the same men who threw him in a pit decades earlier. So he forces them to bring their youngest brother, Benjamin, Jacob's new favorite, down to Egypt.
The new favorite son.
Right. And then Joseph sets a trap. He hides his own silver cup in Benjamin's sack. When the Egyptian guards, quote-unquote, find the stolen cup, Joseph declares that Benjamin must remain in Egypt as a slave while the rest of the brothers can go free. He recreates the exact scenario from their youth.
They have the perfect opportunity to abandon the favorite son again.
Save their own skins and go home.
And this is where I think the text does something genuinely profound. Because Judah steps forward. Judah, the very brother who originally orchestrated selling Joseph into slavery. He delivers what I consider the most agonizing, beautiful speech in the text.
It's an incredible speech.
He doesn't make excuses. He explains to this Egyptian ruler that if they go back without Benjamin, their father Jacob will die of grief. And then Judah does the unthinkable. He says, "Let your servant remain here as my Lord's slave in place of the boy."
That is the turning point of the entire book of Genesis.
It is. It is substitutionary sacrifice. Look at the thematic arc. Way back in chapter 4, God asks Cain where Abel is, and Cain cynically replies, "Am I my brother's keeper?" Here, at the end of the book, Judah answers that ancient question. "Yes, I am my brother's keeper. In fact, take me instead." He absorbs the punishment to save the favorite son. He has fundamentally changed.
And that change is what finally breaks Joseph. He clears the room. He weeps so loudly the whole palace hears it. And he says, "I am Joseph. Is my father still living?"
Oh, I get chills just thinking about that moment.
And right here, Joseph delivers the theological thesis of the entire Genesis narrative. He tells his terrified brothers, "Do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you."
Wow.
He repeats it for emphasis. He says, "It was not you who sent me here, but God."
You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good.
Exactly. The narrative isn't saying that God caused the brothers' evil betrayal. It is saying that divine providence is so vast and so unyielding that it can repurpose human malice, cowardice, and betrayal into a mechanism for salvation. The broken family is reconciled not because they were perfect, but because God orchestrated their survival through the very fracture they created.
That is a staggering way to view history. And, the forgiveness in that room is profound. But I have to bring us back to the physical reality of where this leaves us. Look at the geography. Look at the map.
Okay, let's look at it.
God told Abraham to go to Canaan. But because the famine is so severe, Jacob takes all 70 members of his clan and relocates to the region of Goshen in Egypt. The book opened with a cosmic scope, narrowed to a promise of a specific land, and it ends with the chosen family completely abandoning that land just to survive.
Well, they don't abandon it permanently. They go to survive the famine. Joseph uses his position to secure land for them in Goshen, where they multiply greatly.
Yes, they multiply, but they are strangers in a strange land. They are entirely dependent on a foreign empire. And the text really lingers on the tragedy of this displacement. When Jacob is 147 years old and about to die, he makes Joseph swear an oath. He says, "Do not bury me in Egypt."
He wants to go back.
Right. They have to embalm him and carry his body all the way back to the cave of Machpelah in Canaan, which is literally the only piece of the Promised Land Abraham ever actually owned. And decades later, when Joseph is about to die at 110 years old, he doesn't get to go back.
No, he doesn't.
He tells his brothers, "God will surely come to your aid and take you up out of this land to the land he promised on oath to Abraham. He makes them swear to carry his bones up from Egypt when the time comes."
When the time comes. That is the faith of the patriarchs.
But look at the final sentence of the book. "And Joseph died being 110 years old. He was embalmed and placed in a coffin in Egypt." That is how this epic ends. Not with a triumphant return to Eden, not with the conquest of Canaan, but with a box holding dead bones in an empire that is not their own.
It is definitely a stark image.
What remains completely debated and uncertain is how we can read this as a satisfying conclusion. It is a massive, unresolved tension. They are stranded.
I hear you, but I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because the ending in Egypt isn't a derailment of the plot. It is exactly what was prophesied back in the covenant ceremony of Genesis 15.
The covenant with the animals.
Right. God explicitly told Abraham, "Know for certain that for 400 years your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, and that they will be enslaved and mistreated there. But afterward, they will come out with great possessions." The journey to Egypt is a necessary incubation.
Incubation.
Think about it structurally. The family goes into Egypt as a vulnerable, highly toxic clan of 70 people who were constantly trying to kill each other. They are shielded in Goshen. They will eventually come out centuries later as a unified nation of millions.
But it takes centuries.
It does. The journey from Eden to Egypt is the ultimate story of an unyielding promise. It moves from the tragic loss of paradise to the preservation of life in a foreign land, held together by a God who simply refuses to let human failure stop the narrative.
And I would argue that the enduring power of Genesis lies precisely in its profound realism. It doesn't give us a fairy tale return to the garden. It doesn't provide a neat cinematic bow where the family gets everything they want immediately.
That's very true.
It ends in the messy, prolonged reality of Egypt. It leaves us with deeply flawed people who are holding on to a promise that has not yet fully materialized. They are staring at a coffin, trusting, or hoping really, that it isn't the final word. It shows us that living inside a divine promise often feels exactly like living in exile.
That's a really poignant way to put it. And perhaps that is our ultimate takeaway today. Genesis is a masterpiece because it documents three profound beginnings. It shows us the beginning of the world and cosmic order. It shows us the beginning of human fracture, rebellion, and violence.
And the beginning of the promise.
Exactly. Crucially, it shows us the beginning of a divine promise that refuses to let that fracture be the end of the story. It ends with a coffin in Egypt, not because the promise failed, but because the story is still moving.
There's more to come.
The tension is incredibly deliberate. Genesis leaves its audience perfectly poised, staring at that embalmed body, desperately needing the next chapter, the Exodus. From a garden to a coffin in Egypt, the promise endures.